This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. If you've been anywhere near a home and garden store lately, it's clear spring planting season has arrived. Now, avid home gardeners have been ready, and plenty of folks who've been admiring others' yards and their plants, be they decorative or edible, are out there thinking, is this the year I try my hand at growing things too? Well, today we're talking with two experts with tips and maybe some encouragement for beginning gardeners and advice for well-practiced growers too. First, we have Daria McKelvey. Daria is the Home Gardening Information and Outreach Supervisor at Missouri Botanical Garden. It's great to have you on again.
Thanks for having me.
We also have Megan Moncure, Director of Engagement for Seed St. Louis. That's a nonprofit that supports a network of more than 250 community gardens, school gardens, and urban orchard throughout the St. Louis region. Megan, thanks for joining us today as well.
Thanks so much.
And we want to hear from you today, too. What questions do you have about starting a garden this spring? Are you wondering whether you should plant something new or different in a garden you've kept for a while now? Give us a call at 314-382-8255. That's 314-382-TALK. You can also send us an email at talk@stlpr.org. So let's get right into the basics. Daria, what are the basic requirements for starting a garden?
One of the biggest things I always stress is do your homework beforehand. We always say right plant, right place, and that sets you up for a lot of success. So make sure that before you even think about gardening, start looking at your landscape, assessing it for light conditions, moisture, those factors, and that will influence what your plant palette is going to be.
Mm-hmm. Where do people find that kind of information? I mean, is it as simple as, jumping on the internet?
It can be. Actually, the garden has a great resource called Plant Finder that we use even at the garden regularly. It has over 8,000 plant profiles, so you can actually research plants based on your growing conditions, put it into our database, and it'll populate a list of plants that might work for your area.
Mm-hmm. What is it that you do need to know about where you're planting? You've mentioned some of the conditions, but what are some of the things people in the St. Louis region in particular, should be looking at for that where?
Yeah, definitely the light conditions play a big role. Some plants like very full sun, and others that they actually need more shade, otherwise they will get burned. So make sure you assess your landscape for the light conditions over the course of the day. And then also soil moisture. Some plants like it wet, some plants like it dry. Mm-hmm. So try to find plants that fit those conditions.
Right. Now, we had a question from my colleague, Cindy Collins, and it was co-signed by a couple of our other staff members. Is St. Louis area soil already good for gardening, or do I need to add something to it before planting?
St. Louis soil can be a little rough. We have a lot of clay, so that can make a challenge. However, before adding anything, it's always good to get a soil test done to see what your levels of nutrients are, pH, things like that. So, because you may not need to amend it. You could add in some maybe compost to help with either drainage or adding some organic matter to kind of make things a little bit more suitable. But we always stress a soil test before doing anything.
Mm-hmm. Where do you get a soil test?
Actually, you can do that through the University of Missouri Extension Service. Actually, the St. Louis City County chapter you can submit through there or send it directly to Columbia.
Mm-hmm. So, Megan, in your work with Seed St. Louis, you have talked with people about equipment, for example. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking specifically about tools. What are some of those things, like the basic tools that people need if they are going to start a garden this spring?
Yeah, well, so some basic tools that are just good to have that I personally use a lot, a good pair of pruners. Mm-hmm. I use a ton, a shovel, trowel. Those are just kind of the basics that I use a lot. There are some good, more specialized tools out there, but you can really do a lot with just very basic tools. Mm-hmm. And I would say that there are lots of good, Facebook groups out there where you can share tools or even trade. So it's because a lot of gardeners, you just tend to collect tools over time, and you won't necessarily need them. And so I've seen that a lot where people will put it out on Facebook. Just if you have this tool that you don't need, I'd love to be able to borrow it, or even if you'd like to just swap, you can. So.
Yeah. In the community engagement work that you've done, have you noticed at all that people are maybe spending too much on getting some of these things new, doing this in such a way that is not, economically either sustainable or just not the smartest way to do it?
Yeah, sometimes. Definitely, we encourage people to always start small, to not overwhelm yourself. So, and that includes tools as well. So you don't necessarily need to go out and buy every tool out there. Like I said, and it's also good to get not only swap tools online, but get advice. I'd like to do this task, or I have this going on in my yard. What do people suggest? So you may have something already that would work perfectly fine, and you don't need to have to go out and buy that tool.
And you recently organized a tool and seed swap. Tell us about that. How did that go?
Yeah, it went well. It was the weather was a little tricky that day. We had some unexpected snow, so I think that kind of scared some people off. But we wanted to do a seed swap for quite some time, and it always kind of snuck up on us because they're typically in January or so. And so actually a garden leader from our network came to us with the idea of a tool swap. So we decided to combine the two. And, people, like I said, I have lots of tools that I do not need and use. So I even brought some myself from my own garage. And they went off to new homes at our tool swap. So, yeah. So it was good. We'll definitely do it again next year. It was a nice trial run. And it worked well.
We have some lines that are open to take your calls about gardening. So give us a call at 314-382-8255. That's 314-382-TALK. So the plants themselves, if you're just starting out, Megan, you talked about starting small. What are some of the non-edible plants, Daria, that you recommend for people who are just starting out?
Gotcha. I would say some things perennials are really great. Of course, the selection is going to depend on your landscape, but some of things like we grow that aren't too bad are like hydrangeas. And I will say not the big leaf, not the one that changes color depending on the pH of the soil, but some of our other ones like panicle hydrangea and oak leaf hydrangea do very well in our area, and they don't require a lot of maintenance. And then perennials are going to, be long-lived, so, you'll have many years to enjoy their blossoms.
And when it comes to hardiness zones, the last time that we talked, Daria, you were here, we discussed how weather and climate affect, what will and won't grow so well here. How does hardiness level sort of affect what can and can't grow?
It has a big impact on, what's going to overwinter. And I know that end of 2023, they updated the hardiness zone map, and they put St. Louis area and part of the county as zone 7. However, at the garden, we still tell people to actually stick with 6. It's a little bit more likely that your plants will do well. We are headed to 7, like a true 7, but we find that 6 is still a good one to shoot for if you want your plants to survive for years to come.
Is that kind of question one that if you went to, Home Depot or Menards, if you inquire about hardiness zone, is it something that they'll know how to respond to?
I hope so.
Yeah.
But always, if you're not sure, look at the tag, and it should tell you the plant is hardy between 2 numbers, and have zone 6 be somewhere in between.
Okay.
And then the plant will likely be hardy in our area.
So part of the homework is also learning how to read some of the labeling?
A little bit, yes.
Yeah. We have Cheryl who's calling from St. Louis. Cheryl, welcome to St. Louis on the Air.
Thank you. Hi, how are you?
Hi, doing very well. Go ahead.
Yes. What I'm calling about is I would like to know if it is possible to engage somebody from your organization to come back to the Wayside Garden in Normandy and teach some classes. We have lots of new gardeners, and we're getting ready to start, and a lot of people don't know how to get the dirt ready and all that kind of thing, and I think it would be really engaging to have some instruction.
Mm-hmm. Cheryl, thank you so much. Megan?
Yeah. Wayside is great. I was there last year. It's a great garden. Yes, we definitely we can send staff out to you, depending on their schedule. Just reach out and we can definitely get something scheduled.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything that the Missouri Botanical Garden offers in that way?
We do a little bit. I do oftentimes do presentations for different groups. So if there's any interest, you can reach out to us as well, and we can see if there's a staff member available.
Mm-hmm. Megan, how often is it that you meet people who they just want somebody, and not just a bunch of notes to get this thing started?
Mm-hmm. Often, yes. Yes, we're often asked if we can come out to people's houses, which unfortunately we just don't have the staff capacity to do with all of our work with the community and school gardens. But I will say one thing that I always suggest to people, if you can't join a community garden, volunteering is a fantastic way to learn about gardening. Being around gardeners for several hours, you just learn a ton. I'm part of a community garden myself, and I've been gardening for a long time, but I always learn something new when I'm around the garden members. So yeah, definitely we can't necessarily do that for you, but getting out there and being involved with a community garden or a garden near you is always a great option.
Mm-hmm. And we did have a couple of responses to our call out for engagement on Instagram from Earth Dance Urban Farms, and also I think Custom Foodscaping, that there are some resources available for folks through organizations like that. We also have Ralph on the line from Owensville. Ralph, what is your question?
Yes. I've noticed over the past few years that I've had a loss in monarch butterflies, and as well as the bee population has gone away, and I was wondering what substitute pollinators can there be if I have no monarchs or bee population. I'll step off.
Okay, thank you, Ralph. Daria.
Yeah, I would say actually what you could do is plant native plants to encourage them to come. If you can provide habitat for them, and that will attract more to your yard and hopefully more to the area, maybe even talk to your neighbors about that so that, stretch of native habitat can be wider, and that will hopefully increase more in your area. I'm really hoping that we don't see any disappearance in that.
Mm-hmm. And as far as pollinators and what to plant goes, have there been any changes in the St. Louis region to like what seems to work better?
It's still, I think it still gets back to like native plants. It's supporting those insects that are, native to our area, that they rely on those species. So incorporating that into your landscape actually helps overall. And if you think about how many neighborhoods they are, if everyone just plants a little bit of native plants in their yard, we can really help support a lot of plants throughout the region, or insects throughout the region.
We also have Roseanne, who is calling from St. Charles. Roseanne, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yes, sure, go ahead.
Okay, recently the deer population in our yard has increased because they're building a subdivision, I think, and they knocked down a huge area of woods. And the other day I had 10 deer in my yard.
Oh, wow.
And in years past, they've eaten they've eaten the buds off my daylilies, they've eaten the buds off roses. Last year they ate my sedum down to the ground. And so I'm wondering, what kind of perennials and things can I plant that deer do not like to eat?
Oh,
That's rough.
I feel you on that one. This is probably one of our top questions. I always say, unfortunately, I cannot give you a 100% deer-resistant plant because there are ones that they tend to avoid. But yes, if they're hungry enough, they will eat it. So the best thing I could advise is you can use our website to find typically deer-resistant plants on our plant finder database. The other best option is exclusion. That's the only thing, to build some kind of fencing structure to keep them away from the plants. Otherwise, I always advise people, don't plant hostas if you've got deer. That's nothing but deer candy.
Okay. How about roses? Speaking of Roseanne, my mother-in-law has lost a lot of her roses to deer.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah.
It'll be the same thing if you can find a way to protect them or fence in that area. There are repellents, but they wash off after every rain and you have to keep applying. So exclusion's the only way to really keep them out of a particular area.
Roseanne, thank you for calling in, and good luck keeping those deer away. Roseanne reached us by calling 314-382-8255. Share your gardening questions by dialing 314-382-TALK. We need to take a quick break, but we'll be back shortly to continue this home gardening 101 conversation. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio. Welcome back. We're talking today about home gardening, how to get started, what to plant, and how to make decisions about that all to get the best possible results in coming months. Our expert guests today are Daria McKelvey, who's the supervisor of home gardening information and outreach at Missouri Botanical Garden, and Megan Moncure, director of engagement at Seed St. Louis. So, one of the things that I'm thinking about specifically is what I can plant and what I can eat. So we had a note from Lois, who said on Facebook that she keeps it pretty simple and grows Roma and cherry tomatoes and herbs in pots. So rosemary, basil, sage, thyme, and parsley. How is it that people can start growing these plants, these herbs, as a way to get to other kinds of produce or fruit? Megan?
Yeah, well, herbs are a nice way to get started, and it's something you can grow in a container. So, you can do that in the winter as long as they're getting enough light. And then once it gets warm enough, you can actually put those containers outside, which is always nice. So they're a good kind of starter plant for a lot of people. Tomatoes are also a great kind of basic plant to go with, so that's a great choice. We'll have a ways to go before you can plant them, so don't plant them too early. I know it's very tempting with this warm temperatures that we're having, but I will say one of our most popular resource is our planting calendar. So it's on our homepage. You can also pick up a print laminated version at any of our in-person events. So check the planting calendar. Try not to plant too early. It's just so easy to do here, especially if we just have, a couple warm days. So.
Right. I think people are very excited about getting things started. And a couple years ago, Daria, when you were here talking about tomatoes in particular, protecting them using a bed sheet, not plastic, was something that you mentioned. And on this note of timing, we have Jan, who's calling from Glen Carbon. Jan, welcome to St. Louis on the Air.
Hi, I'm a great fan of the Botanical Garden and a member. My question is also about doing things too early. I have been reading a good deal about the fact that native bees and butterfly larvae and toads and also other beneficial insects and creatures are overwintering in the leaf litter and the stems of dead plants, and that if we clean up our garden too early, we'll be throwing away the next generation of those creatures that we really need. So my question is this the case, in fact? And if so, how long should we wait? I know it's tempting to do it right now.
Right. Thank you, Jan. Daria?
Yeah, there is truth to that. Yes, they are overwintering and nesting. We were talking about this at some of our staff in the butterfly house, and of course, we have to do cutbacks because we have to allow time for the green stuff to kind of emerge. But I think they wait till some of their temperatures are like consistently like 50, 55, somewhere in there before they start doing cutbacks. They were saying so, and that might be the low temperatures, but. Waiting for a little bit of warmth and then allowing them to move out, hopefully, and then doing your cutbacks. But now is the time, too, to start thinking about that. And I will say, too, the garden might do things a little bit early because our schedule is very different in terms of management. But if you can hold off on some things a little bit longer, that can provide some benefit.
Mm-hmm. Jen reached us at 314-382-8255. That's 314-382-TALK. We want to hear from you. What are your questions about starting and sustaining a home garden this spring? The timing part, something that I've been wondering about. Megan, what insights do you have into starting a garden in the spring when you know that you'll be spending a considerable amount of time away, particularly in late spring or early summer?
Okay. There's definitely things that you can plant now that are quick to produce. So they may be done by the time you won't be around to take care of the plants. So things like radishes are super fast. You can always plant root vegetables and even harvest them early and have, like baby beets, baby carrots, that kind of thing. Same with lettuce and spinach. So you can always plant those things and harvest them early. So definitely keep that in mind. I would say if it's early summer, if you can hold off on planting things that just need a lot of water, like tomatoes just in general need to have a lot of water. So if you're going to be gone for an extended period of time, I would either hold off on planting or maybe someone could drop by and water for you, just because those things, like, they won't do well depending on how, what our weather is like. If you're gone for too long.
Right. And that is a big question, depending on what the weather is going to be like here, right?
Yeah.
I think one thing to address now, just so that we get to it before we run out of time, starting anything it can be a challenge. And succeeding, quote, succeeding as a gardener, what are some of the things, Daria, that you advise people to keep in mind when they're just starting out? What can you reasonably expect?
I would say that now you're going to encounter some challenges, and it's okay. I always say if you talk to any horticulturist at the garden, we have all killed our share of plants. So don't be afraid of that. A lot of it is trial and error. Sometimes you just have to stick it in the ground and see what happens. And I always say, well, even if you aren't sure, if it succeeds, you learn something. If it fails, you learn something. So it's going to benefit you in any way. And if you have an issue, assess it. Like, step back and say, okay, what am I doing wrong? Is this plant right for this place? Or did I not water it enough? So on and so forth. So you're going to have some challenges, but that's part of gardening. It's one big experiment, and it's okay if you have, run into some challenges, but eventually you'll get it. Everybody has a green thumb.
Yeah. How did you get your start, Daria? Like, what were the first things that you grew?
Ooh, I asked myself that same question. I think vegetables were one of my first to grow. I don't really have a yard, so I can't really grow a lot. I just say the garden is my garden. But vegetables were my first introduction. And like Megan said, starting with like the lettuces and radishes are super easy. So you're almost guaranteed success in that regard.
Megan, how about for you? I think you grew up in Nebraska, right?
Yes.
What was it? Was that where you got your start in growing? And what was it that you started with?
Yeah, so as far back as my memory goes, we always had a vegetable garden. So I grew up gardening with my mom and my sisters. So I just kind of grew up always being out in the garden, weeding, picking peas, having to shell the peas. So it's just kind of always been a part of my childhood. And yeah.
That part sounds like it was not your favorite thing to do.
No, I didn't like shelling peas. I loved eating them.
Right.
Yes.
For those who are thinking about changes in weather and climate, I mean, is the Farmer's Almanac something that is a reliable source of information for maybe what you can expect to happen, not just when you plant, but as the year goes on? Daria?
I hate to admit it, I've never really looked into the Farmer's Almanac on
okay.
that, but I mean, I think it is one reliable source. It may be a guide to help kind of plan things out or think things through, but almost it's a week-to-week basis. So I always look at the 10-day forecast and see what I can expect, and then I can adjust accordingly. Like this warm weather, it's misleading because if you look, we're still going to hit some lows next week. So I may want to adjust based on that. That would be my guidance on that.
Is there anything that people should keep in mind about the soil itself, Megan, if they are trying to grow in the city, for example, or in areas where there has been known contamination?
Yeah, so what we always tell gardeners that ask about soil, especially in the city, is that look up the history of the land. So there's a lot of vacant lots that we have here. So, what was there before? Usually, a lot of times there was buildings like a house. But if there was something like a car shop, well, that's a red flag. And it's always good to get a soil test just so that you know what you have, but also just looking up the history is always can give you a lot of information.
Composting is something, Daria, you mentioned earlier, and how that is done, like what sorts of things can be used. I'm currently doing a science experiment with my son, and we have added eggshells to some potting soil and then some coffee grounds to potting soil and used radish seeds. It's been very interesting to see that. Are there any composting tips that you have to share so that folks can be ready as the season goes on? Megan? Yeah,
well, composting is a nice, easy way if you have the space to add benefits to your soil. So, one of the easiest ways is just to have a compost pile, like a literal pile, in your space. So it's always good to make sure you have, with compost, you need to have brown material. So I use leaves that I saved from the year before. So whenever you turn it, I always add leaves. And then the other components are greens, which, food scraps, different things like that, and then water. So it's a good, definitely way to add nutrients to your soil and that you can do right in your own yard.
Are there common mistakes, Daria, people make in attempting to compost?
Yeah, I would say probably like putting things in there that you shouldn't. So like any like meat or fish or byproducts like that, it actually sours the pile. So sticking with strictly organic materials from your anything from your yard clippings, grass clippings, leaves, like Megan said, that'll ensure the health of your soil, your compost pile.
Yeah, and I will say as the year goes on, if you have any kind of disease happening with tomato plants here, they like to get disease. It's just a normal thing with all of our humidity. I wouldn't add those to your compost pile. I would put those in your yard waste or, dispose of them properly. So.
Okay. How do you check for information about that? Like something is killing tomatoes in the St. Louis region. Is there like an easy source of information for that sort of thing, Megan?
Well, I will say that I use Mobot's site quite a lot, as well as just the resources of the staff that are around me. We talk about tomatoes. Tomatoes is just, you can absolutely grow tomatoes here, but you're almost guaranteed to get some sort of disease.
Yeah.
It's just how it goes here. So, yeah.
And it's mostly on the like large beefsteak type tomatoes. The cherry tomatoes tend to not have as much. But yeah, like July and August are the hard on tomatoes. Like that's usually when tomato issues start showing up. So you kind of have to take it in stride. Also, you can actually send your plants off to get tested for diseases because sometimes it's hard to diagnose just by visual cues. But a lot of times it's just the weather, the heat, it just fries them.
Yep. Okay. And you don't want the fried tomatoes from the vine.
Not that way.
That should be a culinary sort of preparation. And as we finish here, is there an event maybe that people can be putting on their calendars to learn a little bit more about how they can garden at home, Daria?
Yeah. Actually, our Center for Home Gardening is always open. Right now, we're open 5 days a week. And so you're welcome to come into our building and ask our staff gardening questions. And you can also email or call us as well. And all of us are getting ready for spring. So we're really excited about that.
Okay. And Megan?
Yeah, I mean, you can always look on our events page on our website at see@scl.org. But I know we do have a container gardening class coming up on March 27th. And then we have a YouTube channel where you can look at all of our recorded classes from the past. And those are a good resource as well.
I've looked at that too.
Oh, good.
Megan Moncure is Director of Engagement at Seed St. Louis, and Daria McKelvey is the Supervisor of Home Gardening Information and Outreach at Missouri Botanical Garden. Daria and Megan, thank you so much for joining us today, and happy planting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This episode was produced by Elaine Shaw.
Our audio engineer is Aaron Dorr. This podcast was mixed and edited by Aaron.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.